keep on introducing yourselves, but we'll get rolling. So welcome everyone. Tonight's book is Democracy Vouchers by Tom Latkowski, and I'm going to start us off with our land acknowledgement. So we are Open Democracy, and we acknowledge that we do our work on Indakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the Alnombak, or the people who have stewarded Indakina throughout the generations and continue to do so today. This is a map of Indakina, where we are. And feel free, if you want to acknowledge land that you're on, in the chat. And I'll turn it over to Kate.
Great. Do you want to keep that? Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Exciting to have so many of you here tonight, and to have our authors here tonight. And I don't know if Russ is here yet, but he will be. Russ Muirhead, who's introduced a Democracy Dollars bill in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, is also going to be here tonight. So this is a great continuation of the work of our founder, Granny D, Doris Haddock. And what she did, she felt so strongly about campaign finance reform, was that she took her tired, bunioned feet and body to California, and walked back east to Washington, D.C., sort of 10 miles a day at the age of 89. Talk about walking the walk, collecting signatures on petitions to enact campaign finance reform. At that point, it was McCain-Feingold, and she was brilliant. She figured out how to make it a public relations campaign as well as an amazing walk. So she believed in the importance of campaign finance reform enough to do that. She's been gone for a while, but we will celebrate her birthday next week. And it would be so nice if we could celebrate her birthday with overturning Citizens United and having free and fair elections with democracy vouchers in every state. We're not there yet, but Open Democracy and other groups have optimism and forward motion. And we are excited when we see people who have solutions or possible solutions, pathways to the democracy that we want. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So I'll turn it to Olivia, please.
Well, thank you, Kate. And I just wanted to first introduce Representative Russ Muirhead from New Hampshire to tell us about House Bill 324, our voter dollars bill in New Hampshire that would make New Hampshire state elections run on public financing of elections, why he sponsored this bill, and how you can help if you're here in New Hampshire to with our campaign for democracy vouchers. And then we'll get to our author.
I just hit it.
Thank you, Olivia. Thanks for inviting me. And I just want to say very, very briefly, we have a bill based on this idea in the New Hampshire legislature right now. It's called House Bill 324. To be exact, it's 324-FN-A, but all you need to know is 324. And it would create a voter-owned election fund or statewide elections for state offices in New Hampshire, things like executive council and governor, state senate, races that can cost some money, and races in which that cost presents a formidable obstacle to ordinary people who want to serve their communities and who have a lot of support in those communities. And what this fund would do would allow those candidates to qualify for public funds by collecting signatures. The qualifications are not insubstantial. You have to have a lot of community support to access these funds. But for candidates that can show that support, then they would abide by both spending restrictions and would access public funds. And the beauty of it is that every voter becomes part of the donor class in this system. Every voter can assign their voter dollars to the candidate or candidates that they support. This, I mean, it would radically empower every single person in the state of New Hampshire. And it wouldn't take many of them to completely overwhelm the power of the tiny little sliver of the country right now that constitutes the donor class. So this sounds pretty pie in the sky. I mean, are we going to get the Republican Senate to pass this bill? Is, Sununu, who loves taking money from special interests and likes the advantage, is he going to sign this thing? We are playing the long game. We are trying to persuade people to introduce the idea, to explain the idea. And we write, in the first instance, we've got to convince Democrats this can be done. There's a solution to the problem of money in politics. And then we need to persuade independents. And by gosh, we also can persuade Republicans, and maybe some of you are Republicans, because there are lots of good Republicans who are locked out and disempowered because of the donor class. This is not something that's just going to benefit one party or the others. It's House Bill 324. And I'll tell you, I would really, really help if people went to the House website. We will distribute the link down the road where you can submit testimony online. You don't have to drive to Concord, and you don't have to type it out. You can just say, I support this bill. And I would love to have 500 people say online, I support this bill, and have that tally reported to my committee when this bill comes up for a vote. It'd be a huge help. Now listen, I understand it's not easy to navigate the New Hampshire House's website. So maybe instead of 30 seconds, this is going to take you 3.5 minutes, but it's not going to be that long. It's not that expensive. I'm not asking you to come to Concord and line the back of the committee room while we're doing public hearings on this. I'm just asking you to go online and help out with this. And we'll learn more about the general scheme tonight. I really want to thank Olivia and Open Democracy for basically keeping the cause alive and keeping the faith alive. I teach college students, and a lot of college students, they don't believe in formal politics. By formal politics, I mean the politics that we get because of the Constitution, a state house, national politics, the House, Senate. Why would they? They think it's totally corrupt, and they don't think there's any way out of the corruption. And it's really dispiriting to encounter young people who just think the system is too far gone to ever be repaired. It isn't. It's very broken, but it's not too far gone. And Olivia and Open Democracy are keeping that faith alive. And they're inspiring a whole generation of people to devote themselves to fixing the system. It can be done. And I really appreciate your presence tonight. I really appreciate your invitation to join. Olivia, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your leadership as being the prime on this bill. I'm going to turn it over to the author of Democracy Bill, Thomas Latkowski, and he'll correct me if I was wrong on the pronunciation of his last name. And he's going to tell us a little bit about why he wrote this bill and really how we can use this as a manual to organize other communities to pass these important reforms.
Well, thanks, Olivia, and thanks everyone who's here and helped organize this. And a special thank you as well to Representative Muirhead. I don't believe we've met before, but I'm so thrilled to hear that you're introducing this bill. I second the invitation to everybody here to go support this in any way that you can. We have Democracy Vouchers in Seattle, and it just passed in Oakland, but it's so important for the momentum of the movement, as well as just for the state of New Hampshire itself to help push this forward in more places. So that's really exciting to see progress. So my name's Tom Latkowski. I'll give just kind of a little overview of why I wrote the book, what my goal was, and what some of my work in campaign finance reform has been so far. So I grew up in the Seattle area. So I got to see firsthand when Democracy Vouchers passed there and the effects that it had back in 2015 when it was first passed. And watching that, it was kind of like seeing a split screen, right? Because on the one hand, at the time, national politics in the country were feeling pretty broken, right? Citizens United had happened a couple years before, and we were seeing more and more special interest money flooding into our elections. Obviously around 2015, Donald Trump was starting to run for president, and we started to see some of the chaos of the Koch brothers funding right-wing candidates, and the larger effects that money could have in general. But then here in Seattle was this bright example of what a better system could look like. I think a lot of people come to money in politics kind of despairing, thinking that, maybe one day we'll overturn Citizens United, right? But until then, there's nothing that we can do. And I'm here to tell you, if there's one thing you take away from my book, there is something that we can do. Overturning Citizens United is my end goal too. But that's hard, right? That's a decades-long fight. But in the meantime, there's a lot that we can do to create a better system that is accountable to the people, that allows more good people to run for office, that brings more people into the political system. So that's the broad message I want to get across tonight. I want to go through, though, just a few of the key things that I think are so important about this work, right? I think it's really important to emphasize that money in politics is not just about the total cost of campaigns, right? The reason we care about this isn't that we think there's, some magic number that if any campaign exceeds that number, that's bad. And if it's below that number, it's good. That's not exactly what the issue is. The issue is more that money stops good people from running for office, right? So I am the co-founder of Los Angeles for Democracy Vouchers. And we have done a lot of work looking at who donates in Los Angeles politics and how that impacts who can run for office in the first place. So in Los Angeles, and by the way, this is true across the entire country, donors are not reflective of the city population. Donors tend to be wealthier. They tend to only live in certain parts of the city. They tend to be whiter. They do not represent the broad, multicultural, diverse set of interests in a city like Los Angeles. And this is true statewide in California, and this is true nationwide in the United States. And this was kind of the key problem that Seattle identified when they started working on democracy vouchers. There was a great report in Seattle that found that one of the best predictors of whether or not someone was going to be a political donor before democracy vouchers was whether or not their house had a view of the water. And if they could see Lake Washington from their house, they were probably going to donate, and otherwise probably not. There's nothing wrong with those people engaging with politics, but there are a lot of people that are not that wealthy, right? That are not able to see the water from their house, right? And those people do not tend to donate. What that means is not just that donors aren't representative, it means that only certain candidates can run for office. So we see this in Los Angeles, we saw this in Seattle, and this is true nationwide. The folks that are able to fund competitive campaigns generally come from certain backgrounds. They tend to be more wealthy themselves, they tend to have more wealthy connections, and they tend to be whiter, they're more likely to be men. And that means that there are lots of other good candidates with great ideas, connections to the community, charisma, whatever else you would look for in a good candidate, who struggle to run for office in the first place because they can't fundraise for their campaigns. So that's one of the biggest things that democracy vouchers would help change. The other point that I would make is about, and I think this really often gets missed in conversations about money in politics, is about how candidates and elected officials spend their time, right? And this is, by the way, this is not the fault necessarily of the elected officials, but they are forced to spend hours, sometimes 10 or 20 hours a week, fundraising on the phone with wealthy donors, trying to raise money for their next campaign. A couple years back, somebody leaked in Congress a memo that new members of Congress had received, instructing them on what a typical daily schedule would look like. And it told them that they should spend 4 hours a day fundraising, 20 hours a week fundraising, right? When you are spending fully a part-time job on the phone, doing nothing but asking donors for money, that takes away from your ability to read and write legislation, to learn about the issues, to meet with your constituents who aren't wealthy donors, takes away from your ability to travel back to your district. All of the things that we expect of congresspeople, of state representatives, the things that we would want them to do in a well-functioning system, they're often unable to do because of the need to fundraise. And so I think those are the key things that democracy vouchers helps address. The three key benefits, as I see it, is first that democracy vouchers changes the pool of donors, right? So the representative got this exactly right. It will no longer be the case that only wealthy people, or even only people who can afford to give $20 will be donors, right? There are a lot of Americans who are not going to give $20 to a campaign, not because they don't care about politics, but because they don't have that disposable income, right? Or that's not where they're sending their $20 if they have extra, right? Well, with democracy vouchers, those people can participate too. That's the first change it makes. The second change it makes is who can run for office, right? So in Seattle, we've seen a diverse set of candidates run for office, people who could not have run before, funding their campaign with democracy vouchers. And many of them have a lot of popular support. A lot of democracy vouchers candidates have won in Seattle, despite the fact that before they couldn't have even started a campaign because fundraising was such a struggle. So that's point two. And the third point, which is also super important, is how Democracy Vouchers changes how people engage with local politics, right? The representative spoke about his students who are cynical, right, and dejected and worried that politics isn't for them, and we all hear things like this just in talking to family members or on the news, right? People who say, oh, all the politicians are corrupt. They don't care about people like me, right? And then what happens is the people who say that don't vote, they don't engage, and nothing changes, right? And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, Democracy Vouchers are one tool that can help us disrupt that cycle. In Seattle, what we've seen is that when low propensity voters, or previously people who were not voters at all, use a Democracy Voucher, they become 6 to 10 times more likely to vote. So those people become engaged in new ways by using the voucher, right? Candidates might be coming to their door for the first time, right? And actually talking to them. And all of a sudden, they're not just seeing politics on television or on their phones, they're having a conversation with somebody in their community, right? And then if they use a voucher and are bought into the campaign in that way, they become so much more likely to vote, to talk to their friends and neighbors, and to participate in other ways. So we've seen all of this proven out in Seattle. I mentioned that Democracy Vouchers passed in Oakland in November, which is fantastic as well. So it'll be implemented next year in 2024 for the elections there. And I am the co-lead of a campaign in Los Angeles. So, of course, there's also the bill in New Hampshire. There's a whole number of places that this is happening across the country. So really, I'm here to take your questions. I'm happy to talk more about anything in the book, about my work in Los Angeles, my sense of the movement nationally. Happy to take this conversation anywhere. Really excited to be here.
Great. And if you have a question, you can drop it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask a question. So I'm going to start us off with the first question. How do we get organized? I know that chapter 5 gives us certain elements of, what are the steps we should take, but Tom, tell us how to organize.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of key points. So a lot of this is just like organizing for anything else, right? It's not necessarily unique to Democracy Vouchers. So it starts with meetings like this, right? With people learning about the idea, talking to their friends, reading about it online and spreading the word about it. Basic steps like supporting Representative Muirhead's bill are big things. But there are a couple things that I would emphasize in particular that I think are just good takeaways that we have learned in Los Angeles, feedback that I've gotten from folks in Seattle, just important things to think about when we are working on this movement. So the first of those is how we introduce this as an issue. Democracy Vouchers is complex, right? My book is not super long, but it's still, 120 some odd pages, right? For basically one policy idea. And that policy idea is really effective. It has a lot of benefits, but it's something that people don't always get the first time they hear it, right? You kind of have to use the system or know somebody who's used the system. We've seen that in Seattle, how usage has gone up each time. More and more people are using their Democracy Vouchers because they have more experience with it. They understand it. But so one point that I would make, and that we've tried to incorporate in Los Angeles, is that when we talk about this, it's important that it's not just Democracy Vouchers. This is one piece, maybe even the centerpiece of work we do on campaign finance reform. But there are other important changes to make too, right? It's part of a broader picture about creating a system that's fair for everybody. So, in Seattle, they included some other changes to campaign finance reform, like lowering contribution thresholds, right, for people, changing the rules around paid signature gathering, really, really basic things that might even feel like minutia. But that helped them to paint a broader message that it wasn't just Democracy Vouchers, because you don't always want to get bogged down in explaining how the administrative details work when you're introducing the idea for the first time. So that's point one. Point two, and I think this is probably true for organizing pretty broadly, is the importance of inclusivity, right? Bringing everybody in. So our strategy in Los Angeles, being people not necessarily deeply entrenched in LA politics, right? Just people who care with a good idea, is that we've taken basically the last 2 years and gone and presented on this to as many groups as we can possibly talk to, right? Introducing the idea early, before we even have a particular ballot initiative that we are trying to run. And that's really helpful for getting buy-in and helping to ensure that people feel like they were part of the process. So that's just something that I would note, which I think applies to organizing more broadly. And then the final point that I always think about is positivity, right? So we spoke about how many Americans are cynical about politics. And, I've thought about that. When I talk about campaign finance, I don't want it to be just one more problem, all of a sudden this gets added to the list, right, of things that we have to deal with. But we are talking about real issues, right? So it's important to not shy away from the problem. So what I've come to is the importance of talk about the problem, but immediately follow up with, and here's what we can do about it, right? Here's the solution. We can take steps forward here and make progress. And that way it's not just one more thing that, oh no, the world's falling apart, right? We don't have to be apocalyptic about it. We just have a problem and we have a solution and we need to implement it. And so I've tried to incorporate that into my organizing.
Great. And I love the way you said, when we talk about the policy details, sometimes we lose people. And I always say to people, do we want to keep the current broken system that we have where private corporate, big pharma is benefiting, or do we want to build a system where real citizens and real people can benefit? Nancy has a question about long shot politics. So Nancy, do you want to unmute and ask, or should we just read it from the chat? So Nancy's question here is in the chat, sort of about ranked choice voting, about Citizens United. Some of these policy solutions are going to take a long time for us to build. And so what should we do first? And how do we keep, I'm going to add to her question, how do we keep the faith that we can keep moving on these policy ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, for keeping the faith, it's important to look at the gains that we've already made, right? So, looks like Dan just commented in the chat, New York City just passed ranked choice voting a couple years back, right? Seattle passed Democracy Vouchers. Oakland just passed Democracy Vouchers just 2 months ago, right? So, for me, how I keep the faith is we're seeing real tangible progress, right? These might be, multi-decade long fights to get where we're trying to go, but it's not as if there's nothing happening in the meantime, right? There's a lot of exciting stuff. In terms of how we prioritize, I think we do all of it, as an individual, if you're passionate about ranked choice voting, if you're passionate about democracy vouchers, if your thing is, I'm going to be the person who, is committed to ending Citizens United and works on that until it happens, like all of those are great, right? We need people working on each of these long haul fights. And if you're someone who's going to work across the whole democracy movement and, help spread ideas, good ideas on how to campaign and organize between those different groups, that's great as well, right? What's exciting for me here, in all these calls that I do and presentations that I do is seeing lots of different people who are excited about this and working on this in all sorts of different cities and states across the country, right? We have no shortage of people that care about democracy and are interested in preserving it and fixing it, right? So what I would just say is take inspiration from the things that are happening today. That doesn't mean you have to, lie to yourself and pretend like it's all okay, right? But take inspiration from the positive things that are happening and then find the thing that you're going to do, the thing that you're good at. So maybe you are good at testifying on bills, right? And you're a really effective speaker and can do that. Maybe you are good at writing articles, right? And you can send a letter to the editor or write an op-ed or something like that. Maybe you're good at talking to your neighbors and bringing more people into the cause, right? You don't have to do everything, right? Find the thing that you're good at, find the issue that you care about and focus on that. That's what I've tried to do.
Great. Tom, can you answer Susan Richmond's question about how democracy vouchers have changed policies that candidates feel they can do now that they are supported by citizen donations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it changes. So I'll say two ways that it changes it, and then I'll give a specific example. So the first way it changes it is that, candidates previously might have had to bite their tongue, right, or hold back and not say certain things because of their donors. But honestly, the bigger way that it changes it is that new people can run for office, people who just believe different things to begin with, right? Many of the politicians that we might not agree with their policies, they sincerely believe them, right? They're not necessarily only proposing those policies because of their donors. It's just that the people who might support the policies that are more broadly popular can't run for office in the first place because they can't raise the money to do so, right? So I think those are the ways that it changes. A concrete example in Seattle, I would go back to the 2019 campaign. So that was the second time that democracy vouchers had been used. And in 2019, 7 of Seattle's 9 city council seats were up for re-election. So this was kind of a pretty big year. This was the most seats that had ever been up with this pretty new system. It had only been used once before. And at the time, Seattle was debating some new policies to tax Amazon, that they were going to use that money to fund homeless services. And so, of course, the politics around that are contentious, right? Obviously, Amazon opposes those policies, and they chose to spend a lot of money, several $1 million, which in a city the size of Seattle is a ton of money, unprecedented amounts in independent expenditures, running ads against candidates that they didn't like and for candidates that they thought would be more favorable. And so this was a real question in 2019, right? What the outcome of this was going to be. There were people who thought that the candidates running with democracy vouchers were going to struggle and were probably going to lose, right? Because no matter how good an idea the system was, they were just going to be outspent, right? And we're never going to have more money than Amazon does, right? So how are we going to handle this? But there were a number of candidates who, kept the faith, ran with democracy vouchers, stuck to their principles. And in the end, out of the 7 races, 6 candidates won who ran using democracy vouchers, and only 1 Amazon-backed candidate won. So this is a huge success story, right? Candidates can win even if their opponent is outspending them, backed by, the biggest or one of the biggest companies in the world, right? Who wants a certain set of policies in Seattle. But if you have the infrastructure to do so, and you have the people on your side and the infrastructure to take advantage of that, you can still win. So I won't pretend that, Seattle is now some paradise with a perfect set of policies. It's not, right? These things take time. But what we've seen is that candidates can win who oppose the big dogs in town, right? Who oppose Amazon, who run on a platform of taxing Amazon, right? Those candidates can win. And those policies will take time to put into place. And, there will always be, more that needs to be done behind the scenes to make that happen and to bring this to fruition. But because of democracy vouchers, we can all be more optimistic that the people that are in the room negotiating what the policies are going to look like, those people are more reflective of the city and what the people of Seattle want.
Right. And I know Susan cares about the environment. And when Connecticut passed campaign or public funding, they got a bottle bill that Connecticut had been working for a long time. So environmental changes. And I know when Arizona passed public financing of elections, politicians were able to stand up to big pharma and do what was right for their citizens. So there's lots of different policy changes that happen. The next question is from Neil. Neil, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or would you like me to read it out? I don't see Neil unmuting. Go ahead.
Very good. Yeah, I'm going to a Democratic committee meeting tomorrow night. I'd like to introduce this. I could put an outline together myself, but perhaps you have something that you could email me that I could use, something concise to the point that I could present.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have anything specific to New Hampshire, but let me drop my email in the chat, and I can send you something that we've used in Los Angeles that you might be able to adjust and make work.
Okay,
My email's there, and I'll just say more broadly, anyone who wants to get in touch, especially if you're local to Los Angeles or California in general, but more broadly, if you just have more questions after this is all over, feel free to contact me there.
Okay, very good.
And Neil, where are you from?
Up around Erie, Pennsylvania, Northwest Pennsylvania.
Great. And we can connect you with folks in Common Cause in Pennsylvania who are working on some of these solutions too.
Very good.
And then Dan had a question. Dan, do you want to go on unmute? And I know you're working on a website.
Yes, thank you so much, Olivia. Let me just briefly introduce myself. I'm Dan McMillan. I found a lead and I'm at present the sole funder of Save Democracy in America, which is a nonpartisan organization. Our goal is to achieve passage of a democracy dollar system at the federal level. As Russ aptly observed, he raised the question, how do you get this past the Senate? The only answer really is, as a practical matter, this will not happen. Nothing gets past the Senate without robust support from Republican voters. That said, so far, I feel I'm seeing a lot of evidence that that is eminently possible. I say this because we launched publicly in July. I hired a publicist. I'm not organizing people, but I've been giving interviews. I've gotten about 35 media interviews, mostly radio, some regional television, a lot more on the right than on the left. And actually, some of these radio hosts are very hard right. And they will say, the election is stolen, this and that. But on the other hand, they love what I'm doing. And they will say, they act like cheerleaders for what I'm doing. And I think that the thing is that Americans on both sides of the aisle are fed up and have been fed up for a long time and want change. The alienation and sort of the anti-establishment energy on the Republican side has been directed in some channels that are not so helpful, but I don't think it has to be that way. I think this is actually something that can tap into that energy in a useful way. And I've more and more been leaning into, this is obviously very, not necessarily appropriate for a municipality where a lot of the electorate is progressive. It's a different jurisdiction, but my message has to be a lowest common denominator, bipartisan appeal, is leaning into the idea that this can be a unifying issue that brings Republicans and Democrats together, because it is about realizing the ideals that the country is supposed to stand for, above all government by the people. And I'm finding that people across the spectrum do kind of warm to that message, and that people are very enthusiastic, actually, because even these conservative, these bomb-throwing talk show hosts whose business model depends so much on anger, as it does for all the media, on both sides of the aisle, I think we're all realizing this anger is not helping us. And the divisiveness and polarization in our politics is one of the biggest problems that everyone's talking about. I've been proposing this as a way for Democrats and Republicans to come together and take a first step together to start fixing the system. So far, again, this is not a representative sample, it's not a scientific poll, but given that these radio hosts really have to keep their audience happy and give them what the audience wants, my sense is that even some of the, so-called MAGA Republicans may be approachable for this message. Sorry for going on so long, but thank you. Tom, by the way, thank you so much for your book. It's excellent. I started this out planning to research and write a book about money in politics because I used to be an academic historian and I'm a researcher. But your book, I thought I knew everything about this issue, and you taught me so many things. You've done a tremendous service for all of us, and my hat's off to you. Thank you.
Great.
Well, thanks, Dan. I really appreciate it. I think you are really onto something, right? We tend to assume, I'll own up to it. I'm a Democrat, right? I agree with Democrats on most every issue. And we tend to assume, I think, in left-leaning circles that Republicans are not going to agree with us on anything, right? That we can't make progress on these things. But I think we've seen that on this issue in particular, that is not true, right? And the example I would point to there is South Dakota. I think I mentioned this in the book. In 2016, of course, Donald Trump was running for president, won South Dakota by something like 30 points. But in the same year, a Democracy Vouchers ballot initiative passed by a couple points, right? And these are the same voters, right? It was not a different set of voters that voted on this ballot initiative than voted in the presidential, right? These are people who, disagree with me on many policy issues, right? But we agree that money in politics is a problem, that it has a corrupting influence on our democracy, and they didn't want that in their state, and they were right to not want that. Now, unfortunately, what happened is South Dakota is one of a few states where citizen ballot initiatives are non-binding. And so the legislature called an emergency session and repealed the measure. And so what I took away from that was, firstly, that sometimes convincing legislators is more difficult than convincing ordinary voters, right? Because oftentimes, legislators have run for office with the existing system. And this is no offense to Representative Muirhead, who's still in the room. who of course is the exception to this. But when you're comfortable with an existing system, right, why would you want to change it, right? That's just a natural reaction. But voters look at that and they say, well, this system is not working for me, right? And Democrat or Republican, they're very open to change. So I think that there's a real ability, there's a real chance here that we can turn this into a broader movement, Democrat and Republican, interested in reforming the system.
But Tom, if I may key off something you just said, that's I think is appropriate. My feeling is, especially at the federal level, where the elections are so expensive, I wouldn't be surprised if there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle in Congress who'd love nothing more than to get off the fundraising treadmill. But realistically, we can't expect them to lead, because you can't go tell the voters one day that big money in politics is evil, and the next day call up your evil donors to ask for more evil money. It's kind of an awkward conversation. I think that they're trapped in dependency. And part of the way I make this message more unifying is I say, and by and large, I believe in this, although there are many ugly exceptions. I say, look, the donors who give this money that politicians have taken, these people are not evil. They're doing what they have to do. These are the rules of the system. And if you're you run a major corporation and you don't throw money at politicians and hire lobbyists, you're forfeiting an advantage to your competitors. You're not doing your job. And look, I understand that there are some real bad actors out there in the donor class, and there are a lot of corrupt people in Washington, but I actually feel that, I don't know, maybe I'm naive about this, that if I could get in the room with some public affairs people at the US Chamber of Commerce, you can make a case that even for big business, this is a good thing, because what business most needs from any political system is stability. And we've lost that in this country, and we're not going to get it back until the voters, the American people, feel that they are empowered again and that politicians are listening to them. And this is a way to do it. So sorry again for going on so long, but I think we're in agreement, actually, on the same page on a number of issues here.
Yeah, it's a great point on the incentives of politicians. 20 hours a week of fundraising. Does anybody here think that sounds like fun? Is that something that they would sign up for? Right? The politicians are the victims of this too, right? There are a lot of people who are genuinely there because they want to do good for their community and are forced into this system where they have to spend all their time fundraising in order to have any chance in their next election. So it's difficult when you're embedded within a system to try and make a change to that, right? But I think you're right. There's a better system that we are working to create here with Democracy Vouchers that will be better, not just for ordinary voters, but will make the lives of politicians a little bit less miserable as well.
Yeah, and this piggybacks right on Susan Richmond's question around, to what extent the politicians receiving these democracy vouchers like this new system. And I think Teresa in Seattle has a great story about how she campaigned using democracy vouchers. Yeah,
Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda in Seattle is a great example of this. Somebody who may not have been able to run for office without this system, right? And there are any numbers of these examples. There was one candidate in Seattle in 2017 whose background was in homeless advocacy, right? And so he had been working at shelters and he had been advocating for homelessness policies. That's not a traditional path into running for office, right? There's not a lot of good, wealthy connections that you make working in homeless advocacy, right? Not a lot of people that you can call up and ask for $1,000. But with democracy vouchers, he went around to homeless folks that he knew and fundraised from them, right? And they supported him because they knew him and knew the policies he was going to advocate for. That's something that would not have been possible without this system. More broadly, most Seattle politicians at this point run with democracy vouchers. Our current mayor, I say our, I grew up in Seattle, so I still have the kinship. The current mayor of Seattle ran with democracy vouchers. His opponent in the general also ran with democracy vouchers, right? It's something upwards of 80% of general election candidates run with democracy vouchers. For many of them, they're doing so because they're from a background where they may not have been able to fundraise under the old system. But for others, even if they were doing okay fundraising in the old system, they just like this better, right? they would prefer to spend their time talking with ordinary people in their community, knocking on doors, going to community events. They prefer to spend their time that way, as opposed to calling wealthy donors, many of whom don't even live in their city, and asking for $1,000 or $2,000 at a time.
Great. And we're going to take Grace's question, and then we'll transition to our breakout rooms so that we can have conversations with ourselves about the book. Grace?
Hi. So I'm from Wisconsin, and I'm not sure we deserve the moniker of being the most gerrymandered state in America, but I'll go with it. So what can democracy vouchers do when statistically everything is so stacked against us? Is there some way? I'm almost to the point now hoping that Adam Kissinger will come over from Illinois and run against Brian Steil and WI1, because we can't win with Democrats. We can't win with independents. And because it's just so gerrymandered, it's insane. Any suggestions there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need redistricting reform too. Democracy vouchers is a great solution to a lot of problems, but it's not a silver bullet to everything. When like you're saying, when districts are drawn in such a way that no Democrat in some cases or no Republican is ever going to be able to run and be successful, fundraising might not get you over that hump. So, I don't want to lie to everybody here and say that this is the silver bullet, right? This is not. This is one good reform that can do a lot of things, but we also need things like ranked choice voting, independent redistricting commissions, a whole host of other reforms to make our democracy really function the way we want it to.
Well, we'll just continue to be the poster child for reform like we've been for 20 years. So, we get our cheese in the Packers. There are, perks.
If I may speak to this, Grace, because it seems to me that, I'm not doing anything with gerrymandering, although I have been interviewed on the subject a couple of times, but it's something that could be paired with democracy dollars, or the two efforts could reinforce each other. And one thing that they have in common that's very helpful, I think, is in both cases, you can explain the issue very, very concisely. I mean, the way I explain democracy vouchers, you can do it in 10 seconds. Our problem is that only big donors have any say in Washington. The solutions make ourselves the donors. In gerrymandering, you can say, look, gerrymandering lets politicians pick their voters. That's not what it's supposed to be. We're supposed to pick them. They work for us, not the other way around. So it can be reduced. I mean, it's a glaring problem because it disenfranchises half the country in every election. The minority, it's a Republican district, all the Democratic voters are disenfranchised and vice versa. In our Congress now, for the last election was that there's only like 35 competitive districts left, or really competitive. So that's, it's a sort of thing that can inspire outrage, I think, pretty quickly. So I really encourage you to talk about that.
Great. Representative Muirhead, did I see a hand?
I just want to say that, listening to Tom talk about the variety of reforms we need, independent redistricting, commissions, ranked choice voting. You might think that is just too much, but this country got so corrupt in the window from 1870 to 1900. It just turned into an oligarchy in those decades, and starting in about 1900, as we refer to this window of time as the progressive era. A tidal wave of reforms was passed, beginning with constitutional amendments that made it legal to have an income tax, and ended in 1920, you might say, with a constitutional amendment giving women the right to vote. Things that people would have thought for generations would have been impossible, all happened. So we got to keep the faith, and we got to keep doing what we can. We might be right on the cusp of a new progressive era where a lot of this stuff happens all at once.
So, well, the women got the right to vote after the last pandemic. So maybe we can pass all of these democracy reforms coming out of this pandemic. So with that, we're going to pivot to our breakout rooms. As always in our book club, we're going to discuss the book, but how we got here, where we go, and what are we going to do about it? So we'll have about 30 minutes in groups of 10 to sort of talk about those 3 themes and what you liked about the book. If you didn't have a chance to read it, you can still read it and participate in our breakout rooms. And then we'll pull everyone back together for final remarks on really what we're going to do about it. So thank you all for being with us. Sarah is going to break us into breakout rooms. And I know there's a couple of you that have requested to be in the same breakout room, so we'll hopefully make that happen for you all. So Sarah, if you want to open the rooms.
Yep, they're all open. Tom, I didn't put you in a room, but I'm happy to if you want to hang out. And Olivia, I didn't put you in a room, but I think you can hop around yourself because you're the host.
I'm not sure. I hope you all had really robust and great conversations. And I just want to see if groups would share what you're going to do about it. And I see Susan Richmond's unmuted, so I'm going to pick on her. What did your breakout room talk about?
My goal is to have Linda Bundy write an LTE. Because she has a list of ways to make this cost effective from when it was introduced, what, 10 years ago, Linda?
The commission, Olivia, it's the commission that studied
Public funding of elections, yeah.
and they have that one page that has all the suggestions. So I'm definitely going to attach it to my testimony.
Great. And Susan Richmond's challenged you to write a letter to the editor, but Susan is also an amazing letter to the editor writer. So once you write yours and publish yours, you'll just have to challenge her back to write another one.
Okay. Yeah, the other one of the other ideas is something that I have done, which is to work to get young people to vote. But that's just simply saying that we've given up on ourselves, which is a temptation, but probably not a good idea.
But Susan, I think it does. It takes a multi-generational movement for these reforms, and we have to sort of build in the voices so that it is a diverse movement calling for these reforms. Chris, what was your group like? And what are you going to do?
Great. It was great. But right toward the end, Catherine brought up legal women voters, and I've worked some with them in like sitting at tables, things like that. But the idea that that is not partisan and not candidate oriented would be like, that would be the perfect group to get behind this voucher, idea. It's like it would be disseminated pretty quickly, because the whole idea of the legal women voters is to get people engaged and voting. So I thought that was great.
Yep, the League of Women Voters has been a champion for reform for us in New Hampshire and all of their chapters.
Olivia,
Go ahead.
sorry. I was going to say, but we were trying to remember if any of us had seen where National had studied, because I don't recall a study on it. And so that's specific to this as a proposal that would be endorsed by the league. And so I was suggesting that it would be a great topic for the league to do a top-down study or bottom-up study, I guess, and see what happened. But I think the other thing that I kind of took
Liz Cantarelli at the New Hampshire League sent me the campaign finance study that the league did. So they have a study on public funding of elections, and I can send you the link.
No, I would
put the link in the chat.
Well, I can't save the chat, so I'm on a phone.
Oh,
but
no,
maybe
I can.
somebody.
If she puts it in the chat, I'm saving the chat, and then I can put it in the resources.
That'd be great. But no, but I'm not talking about just campaign finance reform. I'm talking specific to this method, the voucher method, because I remember the study process before. That's why I said they have a strong position on campaign finance reform. But what I was thinking about is I remember years ago working in I live in Irvine, California, and you've got a couple people who came by way of me sending out that blast, by the way. I just want you to know. I'm going to guess it was more than 20 years ago. In fact, I know it was more than 20 years ago. So But I helped, as part of the league, we helped get, and at the time it was called TINCUP, and it was an acronym or the abbreviations for something, but I can't remember what they were for. But basically, campaign finance limitations and disclosures for the city of Irvine. And then over time, it's just gone away. And of course, then we had Citizens United, and now it's kind of just a free-for-all. So I'm thinking that maybe a movement such as the vouchers works better, started at like a city level and up.
Yeah.
I don't know, but anyway, thought I'd share that and see what other people thought on that.
I mean, it seems to be Tom's model, Seattle, Oakland, you know, to some extent. Olivia, how many other groups are there?
Gordon or Corrine or Dan, do you want to report from group one?
I'll let Gordon do it.
Well, gosh, Olivia, I mean, you're the boss here, but
Yeah, we had a great discussions. For me personally, a point I hadn't thought about, and I've thought about this issue for quite a while, is a point that Dan brought up, which is this is not a corruptible governmental thing. You know, when you give you the vouchers, it's a much less. We can corrupt anything, but it's hard to figure when you give people the money how that's going to be corrupted, as opposed to the matching kind of things that can go awry. So that's a very new point for me, at least.
And to second that point, Gordon, you know, the matching fund system in New York City, you know, Tom speaks favorably of that, and you know, you can argue it's done some good, but most people I've talked to who work in New York City politics say that the system actually is in many ways has been badly corrupted, is misused, is abused in all kinds of ways. It's a story that's more complicated that I can discuss, but I've been in touch a lot with one people I talked to is Sal Albanese, who's a sort of leader in progressive politics in New York City for quite a long time. He was on the city council for 15 years. In 2013, I'm pretty sure it was then, he ran second in the Democratic primary for mayor to Bill de Blasio. And that is, of course, the tragic one I've been, because de Blasio was the worst mayor in my lifetime in New York City. I think Sal would have been a great mayor. Sal is totally 50% behind Democracy Dollars. As he has said to me, it's the gold standard of campaign finance reform. One thing I wanted to say about implementation, it's interesting, everyone's using paper vouchers, and you have to have them, absolutely, especially for people who are poor or elderly and people who don't have computers, not comfortable with computers. When this idea was first proposed, as far as I know, the first people invented it were Bruce Ackerman and Ian Ayres at Yale Law School in their book, Voting with Dollars. They envision a national, basically a website where every registered voter gets an online Democracy Dollars account, and then you go online with your password and assign the money to the candidates you want to support. In Oakland, the system they're establishing has both a website and the vouchers. You need the vouchers for people who don't have computers or not comfortable using computers. But I think the website has the advantage. I think that the website would probably lead to much higher rates of usage of the democracy vouchers, because it's so effortless. You can do it at any time of day, any day of the month. Also, like when you sign up, you could have it so that if you don't check a box saying, don't give my email to the campaigns, if the campaigns know you haven't spent your democracy vouchers, then they, they'll pester you. Have you spent your democracy vouchers yet? Please give them to me. And I think that kind of arrangement, the website would lead to a much higher usage rate. Now, that does mean the system is more expensive, but it also would mean that the system would be more effective. One other point I wanted to say in favor of, no matter how you implement it, of the Democracy Dollars Vouchers concept, if it's tied to being registered as a voter, I think that the percentage of Americans who are registered to vote would go way up for a couple of reasons. One, if you're a voter, you have a new incentive to register. If I register, I also get democracy vouchers, and I have that additional clout. And on the other hand, I would imagine that parties and candidates and interest groups would really step up their efforts to register everyone, because every voter they register in a conversation with them is a potential new source of campaign cash. I would think that the hunger for cash would actually drive up. I mean, that's just speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happened that way. And it's not necessarily a bad argument to use in support of the system.
If I could just make one comment relative to that, Dan, is that I'm trying to think 5 or 6 years ago, Olivia, you have to remember, we had a brilliant board member who devised basically a campaign finance clearinghouse bill in which you would run the voucher money through there as well as the actual reporting. And we actually got it through the committee with, boy, I think it was almost a unanimous recommendation with Republicans. And, you know, once it got on the floor, the powers that be said, oh my God, this is far too logical, and they killed it. But
Unethical.
but it was one of those things where in a committee where we had a chance to explain it, and he was wonderful. You know, it just made all the sense in the world.
Great. So this
we have to keep trying to make sense, but we got to realize at the end of the day, it's the powers to be have to be muffled.
we have to build that people power to overcome the money power to pass these important reforms. And so it's one person by one person, and we all know how to have those conversations and keep building relationships and building power so that we can ultimately have the citizen voices to pass the reforms we need. So thank you all for participating today, reading this book, discussing these ideas. We have our books for the year. So our next book is Hedrick Smith's book. We will be talking about Who Stole the American Dream, and that's April. We have One Person, No Vote for June. And Kate, remind me, Democracy, our September book is a book about democracy reforms,
Give me a minute.
gerrymandering, and voting rights as the three legs of the total reform package we need.
Right.
And
Gerrymandering too.
And gerrymandering.
Becoming a democracy, how we can fix the electoral college, gerrymandering, and our elections. Small challenge. Yeah.
And we'll have the author with us
Yeah.
in September, and we'll have Hedrick Smith with us for the book club in April. So please, for those of you who are the first time joining us, I know I see many faces who've read all 9 books and been with us for all 9 book clubs. So so it's great to have you, and please invite friends to the next book club in April, and we'll be in touch about how you can help support the Democracy Dollar or the Voter Dollar campaign that Russ Muirhead talked about, and we'll put you in touch with Tom to support other campaigns across the country. So thank you all so much for being here. Kate, do you have, I know Joe was on the list for closing words, but I don't see him.
Yeah, Joe, I just checked. He signed off, and he always likes to remind us of the mantra of the book club, which is, where are we? How did we get here? What are we going to do about it? And I just think we've hit all of those notes in lots of rich ways tonight. And what I particularly just love is that here on my tiny little square of a screen, I'm talking to Wisconsin and Irvine, California, and New Hampshire. Like, it's just, and New York, we've got the whole country here. And it is good stuff. I mean, there is Bob Perry, I don't know if you're still there, but if you can show us your yellow highlighter and pencil margins, it's like, I don't think there's any blank pages left in his book. Yeah, take a peek at that. All right. So we'll keep coming back to these conversations, I think. And again, I've saved the first chat and this chat, and I'll put them into just a document that will go out on email. And people can add to it.
Yeah, thank you, because I unfortunately was stuck doing the driving listening thing, so I would love to get the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, hopefully I did really save it. I believe I did.
Well, you know.
And we can end with a quote from page 7 of the book.
Okay.
Democracy vouchers can help us level the playing field and make politicians more reflective of the people they represent. So we'll end with that, and we'll all go make democracy vouchers possible. So thank you all.
Thank you. See you guys in April.
Stay safe.
Thanks.